So let me add my welcome to those you've already received. After being thrice welcomed, I hope that you're glad that you are here. We're really privileged this afternoon to have several distinguished visitors to campus. And the first one, a native of North Dakota, Mark Wilson, is the founder and director of the Asia Minor Research Center in Antalya, Turkey, where he and his wife, Dindi, have lived since 2004. Mark received his doctorate in New Testament at the University of South Africa, where he's also a research fellow. And he's also an associate professor extraordinary of New Testament at Stellenbosch University in South Africa. He is a member of many academic societies, including SBL, ASOR, ETS, and SNTS. He is the author of more than a dozen books and many more than 50 articles. Probably best known for his Biblical Turkey, a guide to the Jewish and Christian sites of Asia Minor. He regularly leads biblical and archaeological tours in the Eastern Mediterranean. He and Dindi have been married for 47 years. They have 4 adult children, 4 grandsons, and 4 granddaughters. So we're so glad that he is starting us off this afternoon, all the way from Turkey, with an archaeological trajectory at religious sites in Southwest Turkey. Mark, the time is yours.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for the welcome to campus, President Fair. Thank you for the introduction, Larry. And thank you, Doug, for the invitation to be here. It seems like it was almost about 3 years ago that the email popped into my inbox saying that the focus of the Archaeology Discovery Weekend would be Asia Minor. And so anytime people are interested in my part of the world, I get excited. And so didn't take me long to mention to my wife this invitation and to pray about it. And the answer seemed to come very quickly to respond with yes. And so with a year delay, here I am with you. So we're going to begin our journey here today, looking at an archaeological trajectory of some religious sites. This area of what's sometimes called Anatolia or Asia Minor, specifically the southwest part of that region. So we got to begin with a little geography lesson, okay, first. So what are we talking about with Southwest Turkey? So we look at a map here. Let's see, I've got to get I thought I had it, the right button. Oh, here we go, sorry. So we want to look at some regions that we're going to be covering in this area. Let's start in the southwest with Caria here, move up the coast to Ionia, Aeolus. Notice the cities that are associated with this, all topics of our seminar here this weekend. Pergamum here, Lydia with Sardis, and then down in Phrygia in this area, Laodicea, and just above that, the city of Hierapolis. So these are 5 major regions, all mentioned in Scripture, that are a part of this landscape that we're talking about during the conference. So in 129 BC, these 5 regions and more were all incorporated into the first Roman province in Asia Minor. So 129 BC, Manius Aquilius, who's the first governor now, and you can see where the boundary is located here. It encompasses pretty much the western third of Turkey today. And so one of the confusing things for especially many Christians, they don't think of Turkey as a Bible land. Of course, Israel is the premier holy land, but really this nation of Turkey is a second holy land because we have more biblical sites than any other country in the Eastern Mediterranean except for Israel. And so much of the New Testament, of course, either took place there through the book of Acts with Paul's journeys and others as well as Paul's letters, Peter's letters, and the book of Revelation. So we'll be talking further about that. So Roman province of Asia. So we have these Greek regions, the Roman province, then that's overlaid, which politically over these regional areas. Okay. So let's talk about some of the major monuments of southwestern Turkey, and these will be discussed by other presenters here. I just want to mention the significance of this region architecturally and archaeologically. So we have three major Asclepions in the Mediterranean. One of them is in Pergamum. The other's in Kos and Epidaurus. We have the three major Artemis temples in southwestern Turkey. Sardis, Magnesia on the Meander, and Ephesus that we're going to hear more about. Two of the seven ancient wonders of the world were located in southwestern Turkey. We have the Temple of Mausolus and Halicarnassus in this region of Caria, and of course, the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus, 4 times larger than the Parthenon, 127 columns, largest religious building in the Hellenistic world. We have 3 imperial cult temples in this region, all dating from the 1st century CE, Pergamum, the first, Smyrna, and Ephesus. So we won't be saying much about those this afternoon, at least I won't, but talking more about them as we discuss the 7 churches of Revelation. And then we have 2 of the 3 major oracle temples of Apollo located here. You're most familiar with the one in Delphi in Greece, but we have Didyma and Claros. Claros just northwest of Ephesus, up the coast there. And Hierapolis is a secondary oracle. And I'm going to be focusing the beginning of my presentation on Hierapolis because I've been doing a lot of research on this site. I have an article coming out on it in the Journal of Early Christian History shortly. And the trajectory that we see in Hierapolis is replicated in most of these sites that we have in southwestern Turkey. So many of you know the letter to the Colossians, when we see 3 churches in this valley called the Lycos Valley, a branch of the Meander. Colossians 4:13, I vouch for Epaphras that he's working for you, that is in Colossae, those in Laodicea and Hierapolis. And this is a wonderful old map in a volume of William Ramsey. And you can see Hierapolis to the north here, Laodicea sitting in the middle, and then Colossae here. So this triangle of churches there that are formed in the second half of the 1st century. So if you've been to Pamukkale or Hierapolis today, if any of you made a trip there, you recognize this scene here. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site with the steam coming off the hot thermal waters there. So even in antiquity, this became a major health destination in the area. You can see the beautiful snow-covered mountains there in the background. And people still come there today to enjoy the thermal springs, even as many of you did as tourists. And so just above these is the city of Hierapolis. Most visitors to the area see Roman baths all over, but this is the only Greek bath that I know that's located in Turkey today. It's better than the Greek baths you see at Thessaloniki and some of the sites actually in Greece. And just behind in the upper area to the left, you can see a modern thermal hotel. You can see the confluence of old and new together there. So this is a lovely example of a Greek bath that utilizes the hot springs in this area. I just threw that in. It has nothing to do with my presentation. I think it's just kind of neat. So Hierapolis is a site that's been excavated by the Italians for over 50 years, and they have very active publications. So there's 14 volumes now in print, many of them in Italian. This is their most recent volume on an atlas related to the site, and it lays out the major monuments in the city. So we're going to be talking especially about the Sanctuary Apollo, the plutonium here, and then later we'll be focusing on this area to the upper city. So this Temple of Apollo, the Apollo Sanctuary, was well known in Southwest Asia Minor and antiquity. It was a minor oracle site, but still quite a significant one. In the inscription to the lower left, you can see in the dative case a dedicatory inscription to Apollo that's found on site. On this rear wall, inscribed on the stone, is actually an oracular utterance that's found there. But as you can see, not much remains of this Temple A of the Apollo sanctuary. These are some wonderful reconstructions. I'll be showing you the volume that they're from, showing what this temple complex looked like in antiquity. So it sits right above a seismic fault. As many of you know, Turkey sits on the very active earthquake lines. And in the same way that Delphi sat above one, this Apollo temple sat right above a fault. So this whole complex dates from Hellenistic period when the city really is founded on through the Augustan period in the first century on up to the Severan period in the second century. And so in this little monopteros you see off to the, whoops, let's go back to the side. It sits directly over the oracle site with the particular Apollo here is Apollo Kyrios, with the worship here of Apollo in the city that again would bring delegations from cities and individuals to seek guidance from Apollo. In the old days, even a few years ago, you would go there and you'd see a sign saying this was the entrance to the plutonium that was right in the southeastern corner of the temple. So you can see that, whoops, I'm gonna get this right here, right in this area. But again, later archaeological discoveries found a few years later, just recently, that this is not really the entrance to the plutonium, and I'll be talking about that in a second. So in the first century CE, now we have a second temple that's being built as part of this complex that now begins to function as the main cult building here in Hierapolis. Just to the south, this is the former director, Francesco D'Andrea, of the excavations, who was there many years. They had just dug up this area that they learned was the actual plutonium before they thought it was further a little bit to the north related to the Temple of Apollo. So one of the joys of living in Turkey, I get to regularly visit and see these excavations at various stages. So this is what the final stage of the plutonium after excavation looks like. So they have found the cult entrance here. Strabo mentions this fact that you have the gases coming up through here, and there was not water in antiquity, but the priests would bring bulls, hold their heads into the opening, and they'd be asphyxiated and killed and then sacrificed there as part of the process. So you can see theater steps around, and this is further developed with various theater, another tholos round structure in the area. So this became also a major pilgrimage site in Hierapolis as well in antiquity. So we have the Temple of Apollo and the plutonium, both very close to one another here in this ancient city. And presiding all of this was Hades, and this is his statue in the local museum with a replica sitting up. It's been frustrating in recent visits. This whole area has been signed and walkways put in, but not opened. So this is one of our challenges in Turkey, is getting things accessible. And so just a few weeks ago, they finally opened this after several years so that visitors can get into it. There's really a nice show I was involved in with Discovery Channel that maybe some of you saw. That was produced here a year ago on Hierapolis and the plutonium. So this trajectory of monumentalization, I want to talk about this. So we've got these sites like the Temple of Apollo, the plutonium, and what happens when Christianity now comes into these cities with the major monuments. Audebussin has laid out three principles here that I think are very helpful as we think about this. So first, secularization occurs with the desacralization. That is, the religious significance is taken away of these urban sanctuaries, and then their reemployment as public spaces. Number two, traditional religious practices, that is the polytheistic or the pagan worship at these monuments, are adapted through Christian appropriation of places and images. And thirdly, alternative worship options are at last eliminated, that is the demise of the pagan cults, through progressive disappearance of these pagan cults. So just using these 3 points to trace this trajectory of what happens, not only a place like Hierapolis, but also in other sites in Southwest Turkey. So Hierapolis is associated with a biblical figure by the name of Philip. He is, of course, a disciple and apostle, listing the passages where he's mentioned in the Gospels, also in the book of Acts, where he's present at Pentecost and the Ascension. So how does Philip get there? So if we think of the traditions of the Jewish church or the Jewish believers leaving Jerusalem before its fall in AD 70, coming perhaps with John into the province of Asia in the late 60s. Eusebius, who's our church historian, however, has confused the two Philips of Acts. We have the disciple apostle along with the deacon evangelist. And many New Testament scholars think that the Philip that's associated with Hierapolis should really be the deacon and evangelist, a view I disagree with. And in the later apocryphal Acts of the Apostles, we have, which date to the 4th century, we have a tradition that Philip was crucified here in this city, upside down, even as Peter was in Rome. So some of our earliest Christian sources related to Philip, we have recorded again by Eusebius. Papias, who is the bishop in the late 1st, early 2nd century, writes, Philip the apostle lived at Hierapolis with his daughters. So it's possible that Papias' life even overlapped with that of Philip. And we have the Bishop Polycrates in the 2nd century writing, among these are Philip, one of the 12 apostles who fell asleep in Hierapolis. So our earliest Christian textual evidence is that we have the apostle here in the city. And as we talk about Christian monumentalization, it's very important to note Polycrates' comment to Victor, Bishop of Rome, that the churches in Asia are equal in ecclesiastical, that is, church status, to the Church of Rome. Why? Church of Rome has the tropia, or the trophies, the funeral monuments of Peter and Paul, but the church in Asia has those same tropia for John and Philip. So he clearly believes that the apostle, not the deacon, is here. So again, we look at the landscape or the layout of the city, and you can see just below the icon or the picture of Philip, the martyrium complex. So let's look at how the tradition related to Philip has been monumentalized here in Hierapolis. So there's a tomb that's first constructed in a northeast necropolis by an unknown family, and that is purchased by Christians here in the city. And after its initial use, 5 Christian phases have been identified by the Italians. Phase A, we have a saddle-roofed house tomb that's reused by Christians to bury Philip after his martyrdom. Phase B, early 4th century, the tomb is enclosed by a rectangular building to set that apart. Remember what's happened now? Christianity is legalized, so they can actually come out into the open and construct monuments. After the city walls are built in the late 4th century, and this is a phenomenon of all these cities in Asia Minor, we have this construction of city walls, the city shrinking at this time, and now the tomb is outside the city walls, so a bridge, a staircase, and a fountain are constructed related to pilgrims reaching it. In the 5th century, there's a bathhouse at the base constructed, and then a martyrium. And then this wonderful martyrium burns down within a century. Well, we must remember that these stone and brick buildings had wooden roofs, and so they were susceptible to fire. Phase 3 in the 6th century, a basilica is built around the tomb from spolia from the Apollo temple. So at this point, John of Ephesus, an evangelist, has come through Asia, and he's destroyed all remaining temples that are there. And so as a result of that, some of the spolia or the block has been used in building this basilica. So a very different construction technique to the martyrium that was built probably under imperial sponsorship. And you'll see from the photo how well constructed that was built. And then phase D after the earthquake, because every century or two, earthquakes are doing damage here, the basilica is rebuilt. So let's take a look at some of these phases. So one of the wonderful things that they've been doing in Hierapolis is doing these reconstructions. So Massimo Limoncelli has issued a whole book related to all the monuments here with the CDs. So I've used his work to illustrate this lecture, and you can see the publication from which these are from. So in the first phase, we have a necropolis, and this is the tropaia, the trophy of phase A, the tomb, the tradition. The Christians here in Hierapolis and in the province of Asia believe that Philip the Apostle was buried in. So again, this is the period now before Christianity is legalized. So here in the 4th century, now we see an enclosure that's built around the tomb. There's also a bit of a facade that's been put on the tomb as well. And so probably at a very early period, we have Christians now coming and beginning pilgrimage to the tomb. And of course, it becomes to grow after Christianity is legalized. We mentioned the fact that the city walls are built. You can see them on the south side here, the ravine, the bridge, late 4th century. And now looking up the hill where this whole complex, so we're looking at here at its latest stage before the martyrium burned sometime in the 6th century, with the bridge, the bathhouse at the bottom, the long staircase, the martyrium on the left, and then the basilica on the right. So this is what remains of this octagonal martyrium that was built in the 5th century, later burned. So this, we'll take a look on the inside. It housed rooms, kitchens, and the various dimensions where pilgrims could arrive and then reflect on the apostle who died here. So it's believed that this is the spot then where Philip was crucified upside down. So this is the inside of the martyrium. Notice that it's configured a bit differently than a church would be. So this is not functioning as a basilical church, but as a martyrium. Now, in the about 2012, Herschel Shanks, who is now deceased, editor of Biblical Archaeology Review, wrote me and said, I want to come over and tour a few of the sites. So we arranged to come to Hierapolis. We met with Francesco D'Andrea and some of the other excavators. And Herschel commissioned an article on Hierapolis and Philip for a bar. And so about a year later, that was published. And you can see that from the article that the presumed site of Philip's tomb is right here in the middle, okay? Well, it was only weeks after the publication of the article when they made an amazing discovery that the tomb of Philip was not inside of the martyrium. So it just shows you the dynamic nature of archaeology and how new discoveries provide new information about particular sites. And so this was a major discovery. It made all the newspapers and archaeology magazines around the world as one of the top 10 discoveries in, I think it was 2013. Now, one of the things that puzzled the Italian archaeologists was this bread stamp that's now in the Richmond Art Museum. So if you look at it and just think of it as being reversed. So this is put on a piece of probably blessing bread that was given for pilgrims who came there, that on the side over here, this represents the martyrium, and this represents another structure, each with a stairway up to them. So the one on the This side, which have been to the right, is a structure we call the ciborium that's often built over the tomb of a saint or a very important Christian personage. There's no church there. And so they were trying to figure out, oh, how does this represent what was at the site? And so now with the discovery of the tomb in the church, they suddenly realized that this probably dates to the 5th century before the church, the basilica, was actually built, and it represents the two structures that were in existence at that time that pilgrims were visiting. So the martyrium and then the ciborium are over the tomb of Philip. So that was a mystery that had been solved with this discovery there at Hierapolis. So this is at a very early stage of the excavation. So basically this is all covered with dirt that had filled in over the necropolis through the many centuries. And you can see a staircase to the left that pilgrims would come on the staircase and walk and would be able to stand over the top of the tomb, as well as to approach the tomb from below. So we see, as we mentioned, phase C, then a basilica now is built around this. And I mentioned how John of Ephesus had destroyed what remained of the Temple of Apollo. And now the spolia was used to build this basilica. So off to the left side here is where the tomb is located. And now it's incorporated in a basilical church. I know of no other church in Turkey that's like this. Looking at my colleagues, any of you know of another church that has a tomb like this built inside of it? I think it's quite unique. I mean, we have Demetrius Church in Thessaloniki that is built around the tomb there, but to have a house saddle type tomb inside a basilica is really unique, which you see now in Hierapolis. So as we transition to some other sites, we see this trajectory that we observed here in Hierapolis happening in these other places we looked at as well. So the Temple of Apollo at Didyma is the second best preserved temple that we have in Turkey today. The first one is in Izanoi, the Temple of Zeus that's there. Fortunately, nobody visits it much. It's so out of the way. Typical tour groups don't include that. So this is the remains of the Apollo temple. This is just to the south of Miletus that's linked by a sacred way. Of course, Paul stops in Miletus on his journey back to Jerusalem, waiting there. Now, this is a very interesting photograph showing you the excavations of the Germans from 1905 to 1913. So look at all the busyness that's inside that temple. Can you guess what it is? Look at those walls, the layout, in the nave and the two aisles. You've got a church that's been built inside of the Temple of Apollo. And so this is probably dating 5th and 6th century there. But some of these early excavators who went in and worked in these places, they're trying to get down to the earliest levels, okay? So what happened here in Temple of Apollo? So if you visit this today, you go on in there, this is what you're gonna see. Oops. Virtually no traces of that church. And unless you read the sign and looked at the small picture there, you would never know that a church had once existed inside of this ancient temple. And so just a few of the blocks there that were related to the foundations of the church that were inside. So this is what the naos, or the inner sanctuary, looks like. So when Paul's writing, you are the temple of the Holy Spirit, he's not talking about the complete building on the outside. He's talking about the inner place. The naos is the word that he used there, the place where the divine exists. And so the church was oriented this way, and the apse literally came up onto the steps there. And so this former important temple to Apollo here in Didyma was transformed by Christians in this trajectory that we've been talking about. Here's the Temple of Artemis, and Helly's going to be talking about that, so I'm not going to talk about Artemis much. This is the model you see in the Ephesus Museum today that existed during the time of Paul, the first century, with the altar in front of it. This is all you see today of these 127 columns, the single column that's been re-erected. And then as you look in the background, you see the historic mosque, Isabe, that's there. And to the right, just directly behind the column, the church we're going to be talking about in just a second here related to St. John. So in visits to the Temple of Artemis with some of the Austrians, some have identified a remains of a basilica. I know it's a bit controversial if there was a church inside, so I look forward to talking to Heli more about the current thinking of this, but we were shown this by Ulcater, that this was part of a church that had been built here in the Temple of Artemis, again, here in a later period. So some of the retrofitting that had taken place here with the architecture in its remonumentalized, when it was remonumentalized for Christian use here in the Temple of Artemis. So here on top of the hill that we looked at behind the Temple of Artemis, called Ayasaluk, is the traditional place for the burial of the Apostle John. So as we mentioned earlier, that Polycrates, who was the bishop of Ephesus, was saying that, again, we have two tropaia, two trophies here in Asia, and one was John here in Ephesus. So it's quite interesting. This formerly was a necropolis area. We're quite a ways out of Ephesus, actually, and again, close to the Temple of Artemis, which again was about a mile outside of Ephesus. And so the tradition here is that he was buried, and this ciborium then was erected sometime in the early 4th century, similar to the monument that we saw over the tomb of Philip in Hierapolis. I've read the archaeological reports on this church. It was excavated by a Greek archaeologist after the invasion by the Greeks in Turkey in early 1920, Sotirio, and he found directly under the tomb, under this marble, a main burial site. There were no skeletons left here with a main burial box with 3 and 4 adjoining it on either side. So it's clearly an important figure that was buried here, but this is all we know of the archaeology of this particular tomb. So in the 4th century, similar to Hierapolis, we now have a basilica that's built by the Emperor Theodosius. We have very few remains of that basilica remaining in Ephesus. We know that it was there. And then the great church that we see today, the remains of, was built by the Emperor Justinian as an imperial church, cruciform style church. They had to extend the platform here in order to build the whole atrium area with the narthex and the entrance coming through here. And so we can see these stages of monumentalization for the John tradition here in Ephesus, very similar to what we saw for Philip in Hierapolis. In Pergamum, we just go up the road a little bit. This is the largest red brick building, Roman period, that we have in Turkey today. You can see it's massive. They just finished the major restoration of this particular temple of the Egyptian gods, or to Serapis and Isis and others that's there. The entrance there with a large courtyard with a bridge over a river that's there. So this is a massive archaeological site. The tower on the left is currently used as a mosque, and the tower to the right has also just been renovated by the Germans who work here. And I was in there for the first time earlier this year. And so this is a massive complex that dates from the early 2nd century. So look what we've got inside again. So instead of removing the foundations of the church like they did at Didyma, you can see those here. And of course, one of the things they had to do is they knocked out the east wall here to put an apse. So this is all from the Christian period in order to retrofit this temple to the Egyptian gods for Christian use. Now, what's quite interesting here is part of the process, as we're looking back now, the podium for the statue, and I'll be talking a little bit more about this tomorrow in my Seven Churches presentation. They literally built, you can see they raised the level of the floor and built this right over the former altar, or the area where probably we had a bronze statue standing over this that priests could come up into. And again, I'll mention more about this. So this would be a podium for the talking statue. So the Christians just wiped this out, covered it over, and utilized this space then for the apse and the holy part of the church here. So the transformation here in Pergamum again. Where did that come from? Okay. So coming to the end here, this is a wonderful picture of the Americans. This is one of the sites that we're excavating in Turkey at Sardis. This is a photo taken by Howard Crosby Butler in 1909. And look at how buried those two columns are with Ionic capitals here with the Acropolis of Sardis in the background. Let me get up to my picture. So here we are today. So we can see the excavation that's occurred there. Now, at this temple, it's interesting. It's an unfinished Artemis temple. In the 2nd century, they split it. They made part of it an imperial cult temple and the other part for Apollo and Artemis. But the Christians did not retrofit this temple, which is quite interesting. They marked it all up. Notice all the Christian graffiti, the crosses that you see there. They also etched into the stone there. In Greek, you can read it, Zoe and Phos, light, life and light there. So when you look for it when you go to Sardis there and the threshold area of this particular temple of Artemis that's there. So this is how they marked sacred space, or the fact that they desacralized this from a temple of Artemis now for repurposing for Christian use. So there's no church inside, but they built this very small chapel on the outside. And this is one of our earliest churches in Turkey today, dating from early 4th century. And about a century later, they added a second apse to this. So instead of building anything inside, they built this small chapel just on the outside of the Temple of Artemis. So this is the later restored apse that we've got here in this small chapel. So in our trajectory survey of these, we saw that Bussine's model regarding a trajectory of monuments evidenced at religious sites in Southwest Anatolia really held for all of these sites that we've looked at. We see the Christians continued the practice of monumentalization in antiquity, particularly at pilgrimage sites. So this doesn't end, but what are they building now? They've destroying at times the temples, other times utilizing at least the exteriors and recycling them as churches, but usually at a reduced scale. And the archaeological work that's been done at these sites has revealed this transformation that's taken place through this over the centuries. And at other sites, as we saw, like at Didyma, the Christian reality has been reduced or even removed from them. And so I think I'm done. And this is my invitation to you to come and do pilgrimage sometime in Turkey and walk those steps up to the martyrium and to the tomb of Philip when you come to Hierapolis. So I thank you very much. And
there we go, good. thanks. So we are going to take just a few minutes for some questions. I don't know, Dawn, if we have any from chat or Q&A. Otherwise, if anybody here has a question, raise your hand. I will come by with this microphone. And let's ask, we want to be quick about this, so thank you.
Apollo's temple that was reconfigured, you said it was destroyed. Was it like it wasn't an act of vandalism, was it? It was just to harvest and to repurpose and salvage, or what was their attitude toward these earlier cults? And
so, yeah, we have there's various things happening. Some earthquakes are destroying some of these temples, and they're simply not rebuilt, okay, because of the expense. So that's happening. But the Temple of Apollo there in Hierapolis is believed to have been purposely destroyed in this purge of John and Ephesus at this time. And then many of the blocks being reutilized in the Basilical Church that's built around the tomb of Philip. So we know that some structures were damaged in that way.
You said there were earthquakes. I don't know how many, you said at least one or two, but was the temple sitting right on the fault or close to it? I mean, the fault is usually pretty narrow, but.
Yeah, no, they situated it perfectly over the fault, and the plutonium is also there by the fissure where the gas is coming up. And so this all aided, you know, when the prophet, you know, and this is what they're called at these oracle sites, the prophet would go down and receive an oracle, then deliver it through that. And it was through, some believe, the inhaling of these gases that have almost hallucinatory experiences, that they were then able to produce some sort of an answer to the queries that came.
Okay, I think that's all. Oh, we've got a couple of questions. Dawn, please.
Thank you. We've got a question here that says, historically, Helena was responsible for repurposing pagan temples into Christian churches. Was she also responsible for the changes in Turkey?
Yeah, very good question. I think that she was involved in Ephesus, although we don't have any direct evidence of that. In 4th century, you know, in perhaps sponsoring some of the initial structures, especially over the trophies in Ephesus and in Hierapolis. But you know, her sponsorship, of course, in the Holy Land is very well known, and in more in eastern Turkey along the Pilgrim's Road that led from Constantinople to Jerusalem. But in southwestern Turkey, I think that she does have a role to play, perhaps not overtly, but I think she did.
And I had a question about the Greek bath that you showed. There was a thalos in there, and I was wondering if that was associated with the bath, or if that was an Asclepion that was next to the bath.
Well, again, you're seeing various stages of use of the bath and rebuilding that's there. So some of the walls you saw are from a later period there, but the core of it that was the Greek bath there, and it's extremely well preserved.
Thank you very much for responding to questions and for that fine lecture.